While people always want to know exactly what supplements I take, I feel it's more important to put the facts out there for any nutrients or supplements, and also to help people to understand how they should analyze them for themselves. First off, do we really need them? Many people argue that we should get everything we need from the diet, but there are issues with this, especially in modern times. There are many foods in the grocery store that have little or no nutrition, and they are essentially fake foods full of contaminants like seed oils and kidney-destroying substances grown in a vat of black goo, like citric acid, not to be confused with vitamin C. For many nutrients, we also tend to take in much less as we age, and this is due to poor digestion and poor appetite. Though some extended fasting and many other of the things I talk about are going to help you with this if you practice them enough. For the more elderly, you might need much more protein in your diet than when you were younger in order to get the same benefits. There are also many supplements that are natural molecules in the body, which we seldom have enough of, and these levels decline as we age. Alpha-ketoglutarate and NAD+ are the most obvious examples here. Fasting in large amounts of some nutrients like taurine can boost these levels, but for the most part, you're going to be stuck with declining levels if you don't do some supplementation. Finally, we just don't get as much of many nutrients today. For glycine, we get at least 15 grams a day less than 100 years ago. This is because people don't eat the whole animal today. The skin and bones are just full of glycine, but we seldom get much of it today because we just don't have very much broth, and a lot of the material that would otherwise go into broth in the human diet often gets used for other purposes today. It's a similar story with taurine, which is mainly found in seafood, beef hearts, oxtail soup, and the small muscles in the neck and face we seldom eat today, including the tongue. While it's not required to supplement anything, I think we will be healthier and happier if we do supplement some of these things. However, it's not easy to optimally supplement either, so I decided to take a look at Peter Attia's stack and discuss a few interesting items on his list, and also help the guy out by talking about where he went wrong with fasting and his mistakes when it comes to ApoB, because that's just the nice sort of guy that I am.
My judgment was probably colored by my tendency to be too honorable, but that's just the way it is.
We have seen some people who, when they take too much B6, can actually develop a sort of neuropathy as a result of it. Though I've never experienced any symptoms from it, a little further digging has led me to realize we don't need nearly as much B6 as I thought we did. So I've lowered that to 50 milligrams 3 times a week.
You do need to be careful with B vitamins, and B vitamins are probably best gotten from the diet itself. Too much can be as bad or even worse than too little, and the ratios are also very important. The main reason I wanted to talk about Peter Attia's stack and B vitamins is to address the probable cause of B vitamin deficiency in the first place, and that's a bad diet full of excessive carbs, and especially grains. This bad diet depletes many of your B vitamins and also throws them out of whack, and leads to the production of the harmful short-chain fatty acid propionate. Propionate is shown experimentally to cause autism-like symptoms in animals, and humans with autism are shown to have higher levels of propionate in the gut. They're also shown to have lower levels of acetic acid in the gut, and this is the main short-chain fatty acid found in the gut, and the most important one by far, not butyrate as many will claim. Humans who have autism spectrum disorders are also deficient in many B vitamins, but the ultimate cause of this is the diet. The solution here is a better diet, fasting, and probiotics like L-reuteri, which kill off the bad bacteria that produce propionate and increase the short-chain fatty acid vinegar in the gut.
I take EPA and DHA, so I take fish oil. Again, I'm happy to even state the brands that I take of these things because I don't have any affiliation with any of these companies. And frankly, I like to give a shout out to companies that I think sell good products. So I use Carlson's EPA and DHA. I can't remember exactly which one I take. I can never remember their names, but it is the highest EPA version that they have.
I think it's fine to take some fish oil if you just can't get it in the diet for some reason. But even so, cod liver oil is probably always better due to the vitamin D content. Due to oxidation, even in the good brands though, and the expense, and how cheap sardines, herring, canned salmon, and good eggs are, I probably wouldn't bother unless you just can't stand seafood or eggs even a little bit. I cut this bit out, but he also talks about how what he takes is not necessarily what everyone else should take. I agree because everyone has different issues and goals, but when I make a recommendation, it is usually something virtually everyone should be taking, like taurine and glycine, which I happen to currently take 6 grams of each per day. But starting off lower and working up is probably a good idea, and you probably don't need quite that much taurine.
I take vitamin D. I'm sorry that I'm blanking on the brand. I can see the bottle, but I'm blanking on the brand. I take 5,000 IU of vitamin D. Why? Largely because this is one of those things where I think the risk is insanely low. I think this is really a tricycle, and I'm not sure what I'm picking up. I think it's more than a penny. I definitely think it's less than a gold coin. It might be, a $5 bill. But I'd pick up if I was walking down the street and there was a kid riding a tricycle towards me and I saw a $5 bill, I would pick it up. I think that most of the studies on vitamin D have been very poorly done, and we do need to do a podcast on this. Maybe this is something we could deep dive onto in an AMA. So I won't get into it more now, but having looked very critically at the vitamin D literature, which is insanely underwhelming, I think it is almost assuredly the result of very lousy studies that add no value to our understanding of the problem.
I think a lot of the confusion with vitamin D is the way it's made can be unhealthy and contaminated, and that vitamin D2 and D3 have significant differences, and D2 is basically inferior. When you have a plant, even a simple one like a grain, it filters out much of the toxins, but fungi can't do that. And unfortunately, the origin of almost all vitamin D supplements is from irradiated fungi grown in China. So it's no surprise to me that some studies have linked vitamin D supplements with cancer. The vitamin D itself is probably healthy, and you can have quite a bit of it before you run into problems, probably much more than many would suggest, especially in D3 form, but you can't know what you're also getting with it. Vitamin D2 is also fairly toxic, and high doses are a bad idea, so try to stick to vitamin D3. And it's also better to get vitamin D from the sun or your diet if that's possible. Cod liver oil is also a good way to get it, but make sure to find a brand that is not emulsified, as this is very hard on the liver.
I take Slow Mag, that is a brand, and I take 2 or 3 of those every day. So that is a slowly and completely absorbed form of magnesium. All in all, I'm trying to get up to about a gram of total magnesium or elemental magnesium in my system a day. And I get that through Slow Mag, through magnesium L-threonate, and through magnesium oxide. So I take all of those things.
I don't talk about electrolyte supplementation too much because it's a complicated subject. First off, when you take one electrolyte, it unbalances the ratio in the body due to osmosis in the gut pulling out some of the other electrolytes when you take it in. Salt is the big exception here, and taking more salt makes you hold on to the rest of them. Potassium is another exception because taking 1 milligram of potassium essentially neutralizes 2 milligrams of sodium. Sodium and potassium have a somewhat opposing role in the cell, and they are used in the sodium-potassium pump. So while normally the kidney works hard to hold on to sodium, taking potassium will signal the kidney to release more of it into the urine. I'd prefer to get magnesium mainly through the diet, and when found in animal products, it will maintain the proper electrolyte ratio in the body. Many plant foods have excessive levels of copper, and some have excessive levels of selenium, like Brazil nuts. I love Brazil nuts, but you're going to quickly put your electrolytes out of whack if you have a large amount of them. Liver is also quite high in copper, so it's one reason you may not want to eat it excessively. Boron and zinc tend to be completely absent in plant foods today, especially when grown in a modern, depleted soil with modern high-intensity agriculture. Iodine can be deficient in both plant and animal products, but it tends to be adequate in seafood, so you don't necessarily need to supplement it. If you do take a magnesium supplement for some reason, you definitely don't want magnesium oxide, which is one of the types found in slow mag, which is very puzzling to me. You want either magnesium threonate or, better yet, magnesium glycinate, both of which can penetrate the blood-brain barrier. But I would not excessively supplement magnesium, zinc, or iodine. A very small amount from a high-quality source is probably the best way to go.
I take methylfolate and methyl B12. I use Jarrow as a brand. Again, here we do have biomarkers. You can measure B12 levels, but more than anything, I'm measuring homocysteine levels. That's why I'm taking methylated versions of those. And basically, I take these to keep homocysteine below 9. And that for me just means just taking one a day. So I take the standard dose of that. They do make it in 2 strengths, and I take the lower of the 2.
And this is exactly the wrong reason to take B vitamins, though many times that's exactly why people are taking it. A lot of these issues are caused by the gut and a bad diet, and the way to fix them is also with the diet. Choline in the diet will help a great deal with methylation because it's full of methyl groups. Eating more meat and eggs will help a great deal, but if you want to supplement for this purpose, then the best bet is to supplement TMG. TMG, or trimethylglycine, is 3 methyl groups attached to a glycine molecule, and this is a component found in choline. This is the critical component as far as the liver is concerned, and that's why I take TMG instead of choline. I take 1 gram a day, but if I were still developing, I would take an equal amount of phosphatidylcholine as well.
I take a baby aspirin a day. I think the evidence for the use of baby aspirin in cardio protection is pretty weak. This is kind of a soft call. I don't think there's an evidence-based reason why I should take a baby aspirin, and there's even some evidence to suggest that once you get significantly older, unless your risk of cardiovascular disease is significantly high, the benefits of it, which are clear, there's no doubt there are benefits of a baby aspirin, but they're outweighed by the bleeding risks that are associated with aspirin use.
I take a regular strength aspirin every single day, which is 325 milligrams. Clotting is extremely important for heart disease, which is really a disease of inflammation and clotting. It's also important for AFib and many other issues. Since I have A blood type and very high RBC count, just like my father, I'm very at risk for these problems. It is amusing to me how histrionic people become over the risks of taking baby aspirin daily, which is just 81 milligrams. There's a professor in Wales who did an extremely exhaustive analysis of every single experiment ever done with aspirin and every single epidemiological research project that was ever done, and concluded that there is not only a clear benefit for heart disease, but also for cancer, especially when it comes to metastasis of cancer, which is the ultimate problem in dealing with cancer that ultimately kills you. He also concluded that though there were slightly more bleeds seen in those taking aspirin daily, there was not even one additional serious bleed reported from one single study. So you might have slightly more minor bleeds, in which case you should lower the dose or take a break from it, but no one has ever bled to death by taking a small amount of aspirin daily, not even statistically speaking. Aspirin stimulates AMPK in your cells, and it is also an AMPK reuptake inhibitor. In fact, it's the only one you can get in supplement form, and there isn't even a drug that does this. Only a few weird research chemicals that come from coral ground up from the ocean. AMPK is basically a signal to cells to produce more ATP and to burn more fat within the cells, and this is probably the reason that aspirin helps with the metastasis of cancer in the body, because it makes you more healthy on a metabolic level and it reduces insulin resistance.
So I take Athletic Greens in the morning. Disclosure, I am an investor in that company. I'm also an advisor to that company. So I take AG1 as a green drink in the morning, and I take a probiotic called glucose. I think it's called Glucose Control by a company called Pendulum. So I take 2 of those in the morning.
I think Athletic Greens is basically a scam, and it's hard to trust anyone who promotes it, including Mr. Attia.
Dr. Evil, I didn't spend 6 years in evil medical school to be called Mr. Thank you very much.
Anytime you heavily concentrate and process plant foods to get nutrients, you're also going to get a lot of passengers coming along with it that you don't want, and that's heavy metals and other contaminants. It's also wildly expensive for the nutrients it claims to provide, regardless of purity, so it's impossible for me to justify taking this stuff, let alone selling it. The reason so many people support this stuff is that it's just really not possible to make much money on social media unless you're selling something. But there's many terrible products like Magic Spoon cereal and Athletic Greens that I don't think anybody should be lending their name to. But that's up to them, I guess. I think probiotics are great, but so far I think L-Reuteri is by far the most convincing one. I make homemade probiotic yogurt with it, and I feel like my digestion is better, and hopefully I'm healthier overall. As time goes by, it could be that other probiotics are much better, but both the mechanisms and the end results for L-Reuteri are surprisingly good, and they're well proven. These will work even if they don't colonize the gut, and one way L-Reuteri gives benefit is to create acetic acid in the gut, which has a great positive impact on human health, because acetic acid or vinegar is the most important short-chain fatty acid in the gut. I've wanted to talk about Attia for a while. He used to promote fasting, then did a big turnaround. I'm not sure if this is simply heading where the money is, or if he just got tired of it. Fasting has tons of benefits, but it's not always easy. Same thing with eating carbs. People just don't want to accept that they can't eat all the carbs they want. They also don't want to admit that it's due to addiction, and they don't seem to realize that we had very little carbs in our diets before the modern time. Attia claimed to lose muscle from fasting, but there's many issues with this statement. First off, he never really had much muscle. He's a bicyclist and an archer, and he doesn't really seem to lift weights at all. Second, he did the exact worst exercise routine while fasting. As soon as he started the fast, he'd do high-intensity cycling to supposedly get the glycogen out of the liver and get into ketosis more quickly. This is the worst-case scenario because you're not yet into ketosis, and being in ketosis helps protect against muscle loss from exercise. You also generate a great deal of cortisol when you do intense cycling, and this burns a lot of lean tissue when you're not in ketosis. When you wake up in the morning, your glycogen stores are probably going to be low or gone anyway, so it really makes no sense at all. Ketosis is just one part of why we fast, and it's really a very minor part of the reason we fast. And if you're not in ketosis yet, that just means your liver is getting rid of some of the fat in your liver by turning it into glucose, and that's a very good thing. In fact, that's the first place that you lose fat when you fast. It comes directly out of the liver because that's where all of the sugar in your blood actually comes from. If you really want more muscle, eat more meat and fewer carbs and lift weights. You eat meat not just for the protein, but the endless nutrients such as taurine, carnosine, carnitine, and many others which are shown to help athletic performance. I do lift weights, and I have much more muscle than Attia, and I've had only benefits since I started to fast. And in virtually all long-term studies, fasting leads to gains in lean tissue, not loss. This is because of growth hormone release, better digestion, and because catabolism is a necessary part of both healing and muscle growth. Dr. Attia has a little panic a little while ago where he suddenly drastically changed his opinion on a low-carb diet. He started to say it is a dangerous diet due to some quack data about ApoB. In reality, ApoB is just another useless blood marker which is a stand-in for cholesterol. Since it has never been shown that cholesterol is the cause of heart disease, and Ansel Keys and others who have claimed this have been proven to be frauds, there is just no basis to think that ApoB is anything to do with anything.
However, by the early 1970s, even the American Medical Association had come in line with the others, the American Heart Association and the National Academy of Science. And all three organizations issued statements in the early 1970s that were virtually identical. These were official statements about diet and heart disease. The first thing these statements said was that Americans had cholesterol that was too high, and that it was important for Americans to lower their cholesterol. And they called for measuring cholesterol as a routine part of physical examinations, or even in early adulthood. So we want to make Americans anxious about their cholesterol levels at a very young age. We are instilling cholesterol anxiety in the population. Americans who were in the risk category should receive appropriate dietary advice, and Americans in the risk category should reduce their intake of saturated fats by substituting polyunsaturated vegetable oils. I put risk in quotation marks because they actually hadn't yet defined who was at risk. Were you at risk if your cholesterol was average at 240, or if your cholesterol was slightly high at 300, or if your cholesterol was low at 200? They hadn't decided who was at risk. So what I want to do now is look at three major studies that you all paid for. These were paid for with tax dollars, and these are the three studies that are mostly referenced in material that comes from our government promoting the lipid hypothesis. The first was the Framingham study that went on for 40 years in the town of Framingham, Massachusetts, where they were looking at risk factors for heart disease. And when the results came out, this was in 1987, they were published in a major journal summarized in this graph. And it does look as though if your cholesterol gets up into this level, it starts to get pretty scary. And you look like and it looks like you're quite at risk for heart disease if your cholesterol is in this interval or higher. Now, has anyone here ever taken statistics? Or sadistics, as my son calls them. Yeah. Okay. Do you notice something strange about this chart? If you look at the intervals, the first interval is 121 points. It goes from a cholesterol level of 84 to 204. Okay. Then the next interval is 30 points, and then 30 points, and then 30 points. And the last interval is 830 points. It goes from 295 to 1124. Now, if you had done that on your statistics test, you would have gotten an F. This is cheating. This is cheating. And this was published in the American Heart Journal. So I redrew the chart, and I made the intervals equal, and now it looks very different, doesn't it? Yes, if your cholesterol's up here at 1,000, anybody in this room who has cholesterol levels of 1,000? It's very rare. It's extremely rare. You are definitely slightly more at risk for heart disease, but not very much. It's certainly not something to get too frightened about. And as you'll notice, inside this circle between 185 and 285, this is basically a straight line. That means you're no more at risk if your cholesterol is 285 than if it's 185. So why are we making these huge changes in our diet?
Recently, there's also been a panic about niacin supposedly causing heart disease, even though there's very robust experimental data showing that niacin reduces heart disease and it is prescribed by doctors for that purpose. An association was found between the metabolites of niacin and heart disease, but an actual experiment always trumps weak associational data, and experimentally there's very solid data that niacin helps a great deal with heart disease, especially at higher doses. The most likely reason for this association is that those with heart disease also have less functional livers, which means they cannot clean up these metabolites as well anymore. This is just like finding creatinine in the blood and associating it with kidney failure, and then thinking that creatine is going to cause liver failure. If you have more creatine in the diet, it does go up in the blood, but the creatine itself isn't doing anything harmful, and neither is the metabolite of creatine. And that's exactly the same thing as when vegans and some doctors will try to tell you not to have too much protein because it's going to be bad for the kidney. It's not bad for the kidney to have protein. Excess protein in the blood is just a sign that you have problems with your kidneys.
First, you develop a stage called microalbuminuria. And this is a stage where there are very, very minute quantities of protein, mostly albumin, that can be detected in the urine. The protein itself is not dangerous to the kidney, but it's not supposed to be there and is usually one of the first indications you see that the diabetes is starting to affect the kidneys. Think of it this way. The kidney is sort of like a sieve. Imagine you're washing blueberries in the sink. The blueberries go in the sieve, you pour in the water, that holds all the blueberries in, and the water goes out. If you start to see blueberries in the sink, well, there's nothing wrong with the blueberries, but it means you have a hole in your sieve. Same thing with the kidneys. The kidneys are supposed to keep all of that protein inside and let all the urine flow out. If you start to see protein in the urine, it's not that you're eating too much or too little protein or the wrong protein. It means that there's little tiny holes in the kidney that really shouldn't be there, and it's usually caused by the diabetes.
I came across this information when a video from an NMN promoter popped up, and he suggested it meant that NMN was better than niacin. In reality, they both have these same metabolites, so NMN provides no benefit in this sense, even if this faulty assumption that they were causing heart disease were true. I'd also add that both NMN and niacin do require methylation in the liver in order to be processed. So if you do supplement them, I would supplement at least an equal amount of TMG to make sure your liver can properly deal with them. So I wouldn't worry about taking niacin causing heart disease. Putting a baseless opinion like that into a study and passing it off as science is really beyond irresponsibility and could be considered fraud. You don't have to take supplements, but they are by far the easiest way to ensure that you get ancestral levels of all these important nutrients in the body, many of which are little talked about. They can also make up for the internal chemical deficiencies we experience with age, such as flagging levels of NAD+ and alpha-ketoglutarate. This is a safe and easy way to stay healthy, and it doesn't really cost that much. And this lets us spend our time and energy on the more important goals in life.
After this, Derby.
Right.
Then, Lincoln. And after Lincoln,
Works up.